It's been like COVID is kind of falling off. Well, it's still there, but we're pretending it's gone. So lockdowns and shit are gone. How is the player base doing? We haven't looked at this in a while. Like we haven't looked at it in a long time. Um, COVID kind of inflated player numbers for a while, but that's kind of disappeared now. So I figured, what if we take a look? How are the servers doing? How is the player base doing? How is World of Warship's health? What is the health status of our game? It's been soon. It's soon been 2 years since I got kicked from the CC program. I got kicked March 21 for being very vocal and disagreeing hard with the choices Wargaming have made. So we're closing in on 2 years since then. So I feel like it's time to see where has these wargaming decisions and policies and choices, where has this led them? Is the game growing? Is the game getting better? Is the game improving? Well. Which server should we start with? We can start with probably. Well, we can start with the least. I would say least interesting one, but the one that's always been the smallest server of them all, and that is Asia. Asian server. This is 2020. We had a peak. Honestly, I would say Asia has stayed pretty stable. But I don't know. I don't know about this. I've heard this, but I can't confirm it myself. But I've heard a lot of talk about botters on C server. A lot of botting on the C server. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that it's getting a lot worse with the bots. Full of bots. Yeah, that's what I've heard about the C server, that it's basically become kind of a botting haven. Everyone is saying yep, can confirm it. Yeah, that's kind of what that's a bit what I was worried about. I feel like they're not as much leaving as the real players might be fading. But in terms of numbers, I would say, well, we had a fall off. This was, I guess, COVID isolation times. We had a big peak of players, and that player number quickly dropped. But generally speaking, kinda even, but obviously this doesn't go and show what's going on underneath. Namely, it doesn't show the botting. It doesn't show the botting issues. And we know for a fact Wargaming basically never bans anyone from their game. So I've never seen or heard of a bot getting banned. In fact, I've never even seen anyone actually get banned, permanently banned from the game. Like I've seen like people getting caught for cheats and all sorts of shit and still haven't been. Um, but if we ignore that, if we ignore what's probably going on underneath the surface, I would say the C server is looking pretty stable since January 2020. It's looking pretty stable, right? Kind of even. Obviously, we don't have the botting numbers, so we don't know. But I would say it's looking kind of stable. Okay, well, let's see then. Let's look at another interesting server. Another interesting server because of everything that's been happening on it, namely the Russian server. The Russian server. The Russian server. Well, this is brutal. Like, this is fucking brutal. The numbers. We're talking about significant downfall. Significant downfall. We went from averaging about, well, what, 20, what is this, about 24,000? We went from about averaging 24,000 over here to a significant drop after COVID, a huge plummet down to almost 16k, and then it recovered a bit. It recovered a bit back up to about 20, and this is of course February 20th. And this is, of course, war. This is war. This is war started, and they basically instantly lost about 4k active players. dropped off a cliff. And they're down to about 15k. And they're kind of struggling. And this is, of course, this number here is quite important. This is when they started transfers away from Russia. This is when they started transfers away from Russia. So I guess people logged in basically final times and transfers away from the Russian server started. And at this point, well, we just had a patch hit and these numbers, well, we're dropping closer to 12,000 at this point. So this is, if you consider that back here we were up at 24k, now we're at 12k. The Russian player numbers have dropped basically in half. This is 50% gone, which is a pretty brutal drop in numbers. That's a pretty goddamn brutal drop in numbers. That is, I don't really see any other way of looking at that. Ideally though, considering this drop, significant drop, and many of these transferred to EU and NA, we should see EU and NA in an upward curve, right? Because like these guys transferred away, and I think most went to EU, so EU should be getting a significant amount of Russian players. We've had a lot of transfers from Russia to EU, so EU should be doing the best out of these servers because they have been taking a lot of these players to them. So EU should be doing extremely hot here. EU should be doing extremely hot here. How hot is EU actually doing? Let's see. EU total. Since January, once again, to September. Well, we had our COVID boost here as well. Our COVID boost, a bit of sustain after it, through 21. And after that, we've had some small drops, recoveries. And then when is this? This is this year, January this year. Ever since January, we've had a big, probably the deepest drop. And the longest, honestly. This was a small dip, this was a small dip. This has been a long drop. And this is what, September 20th? This is when we got the Russian players to our server. And the 4K that they dropped, we can kind of see the 4K coming back here. But I feel like this is kind of masking the trend that we had before the transfers came over. Like this is, in fact, if you look at this like this, it's maybe a bit more interesting. This is average player numbers. Average player numbers for 2020 is 14.7k. Average. 14.7k for 2020. And then we look at 2021 and it's 13,000. So we dropped from 14.7 average to 13,000 from 20 to 21, which in terms of numbers doesn't sound big, but in terms of percentage, that's a big fucking drop. That is a big fucking drop. From 14.7 to 13, and this latest year, 2022, we went from 14.7 to 13. What do you think the drop, what do you think the numbers for this year is? $11.10. It's not that bad, but it's, well, under 12k. So, and this is kind of scary because this includes a whole month. Well, not entirely a whole month, but a big boost of getting the Russian transfers in. I think before this boost of Russian players, this would have been probably 11k. But these transfer numbers giving us this kind of artificial boost puts us at almost 12. But still, that's 14.7, 13, 12. And it would be a lot worse than 12 if it wasn't for the transfer. So I don't see how you can look at this in any other way except numbers are dropping. and numbers are dropping hard. And this really puts Wargaming's decisions and choices starkly into question. Like, what the fuck are they doing? Because this game had a very stable player base. Like, a super stable. Like, we can literally go to compare January 16th here to basically January 19th, a 3-year gap here, and the numbers have basically stayed even. But then these last couple of years, probably the years where I've been most vocal and disagreed the heaviest with their decisions, the player base has started free falling. So, how long are they gonna pretend like it's a silent majority that wants all these choices they want? How long are they going to pretend that they actually know best? How long are they just going to keep ignoring the player base until there's no player base left? I don't understand. All the numbers is kind of showing that everything they say is full of shit and their decisions are driving players away. We already know that the new player queue is dead. I mean, just this patch we had the cross server, EUNA, like all these EUNAC cross server new player platform thing where they try to combine the new players because there's not enough new players. So they're not getting new players and the old player base is dropping. At what point do they perhaps entertain the idea that their choices haven't been the best for a long time? Okay, but let's see. This was EU then. What about NA? What about NA? NA has always been a pretty small server. So the Russian server has basically fallen off a cliff. The EU server is still steadily dropping players. What about the NA server then? How is NA doing? How is NA performing here? How is NA performing here? Let's see. Well, NA was never really the biggest server, but they used to be pretty stable. In fact, I would say that you can see kind of from January to September, from basically 2017, 2018, 2019, there was actually small growth in the player numbers. Like the game was actually still growing at this point. But then we had COVID. It gave them this artificial boost. I think COVID was a really big problem for Wargaming. And they didn't realize it was a big problem. I mentioned it, but they kind of ignored it. But I think they were convinced that their choices and decisions were really fucking good. And they didn't understand that this artificial player boost was because people were forced to sit at home. They had nothing to do, so they might as well play some World of Warships. Like every online game got a huge boost in player numbers because of COVID. And I think they thought it was because they were making such great fucking decisions, but they were already fucking up then. And it's only been worse since. And I don't think they're realizing now that the COVID lockdown is no longer a thing and other things are stealing their attention because, well, they're making these terrible choices. The drops have been, well, let's see. We had over 20,000, the highest peak. And this was during the height of lockdown in April on NA. Since then, well, lockdown ended. Oh my god, the drops though. When was this peak? This was January, and we had about 17,000 this year. And since then, holy shit. And now we're peaking here at what, 14,000? That is, once again, I don't know how to look at this except pretty blatant. NA had a lot of sea refugees as well, exactly. Like the EU and NA server should be going up if the player numbers were even, because people left Russia to go to EU and people left C to go to NA. Yet, what we're seeing is that they're all dropping. They're all dropping. In fact, if you compare, if you want something really brutal to compare with, if you want a really brutal comparison here, this is, like the NA server was never big, but this is NA average numbers. This is NA average numbers for 2020. In 2020, the NA server averaged 9.4k players. 9.4k average. That's not a lot. But, I mean, considering it's still a nice number. Like, it's not as big as these other servers, but it's still a significant number. In 2022, NA has averaged 7,560. That is a fucking brutal drop. That is a fucking brutal drop. Like going from 9.4 to 7.5. That's over a 20% drop in player numbers. %20%. Flamu, when you were on honeymoon, basically the whole WoW's viewers were basically only 2 to 3k. Yeah, I mean, I know there is some drop off there, but still, this is 2020 is missing holiday player numbers. That is fair, but you got to remember that the boost already happened in like the upticks that we had in 2020. We had significant summer upticks here, and we had all this COVID uptick and everything. Here there was no longer COVID, and we were still averaging. Well, actually, there's no holiday boost here. There's very little holiday boost. In fact, looking at the 2020 numbers, they had more players during the summer than they did during the winter. And in fact, we are getting a boost in January here. Okay, well, let's see. Provided no one has crashed this, let's see what the average numbers for 2021 is, because we can get the whole year there. So we go 9417. Let's see if this site has already been crashed. It crashes very easily if people open it. Oh, no, it loaded. What was it? 9.4k. 9.4k. And 8,050. So that's still a gigantic fucking drop. That's still this is from 2020 to 2021. From 9.4k to 8,000, and this is including the entire year. It's percentage-wise, you have to understand, this is a fucking brutal drop. This is a brutal direction the game is going in, right? That spike in January, I guarantee it's something has to do with the Kriegsmarine battle cruisers. Yeah, I'm thinking that as well. And this is a 15% drop. This is a 15% drop. But let's see, January 21 to August. 8169. Okay. Let's do the same thing here. 8169. Again, it's 8169. That's the same, once again, the same time period in 21, the same period in 22. And what was it? 8.2k to 7.6k. That is not good. That's almost what, 10%, 8%. Like, that's a fucking brutal trend. 7% drop. 7% drop in average players in a year, especially when the server is already this small, is really bad, because NA is risking hitting that wall when suddenly there's not enough players to form any decent matchmaking. You don't get good games anymore. We've already had some screenshots from there with people like getting these weird small games, 4 versus 4s, or 2 CV and 1 cruiser against 2 CV, 1 cruiser, like these weird fucking games. We're always seeing a lot of those pictures. And this is going to get exponentially worse, because when people start getting these games and people have to wait in queue and there's not enough players, they're going to realize, ah, fuck, this is kind of like, this game is falling off. I'm going to go play something else. And at one point you hit this critical mass where the players realize, shit, there's not enough players in this game, I should be playing something else, and suddenly it drops off a cliff. And you can see this in a lot of games where once it starts going down, it goes once it hits critical mass. Those small number games generally happen overnight. Exactly. So far, the peak is still, like, we're still hitting our 12k a peak during the day, which is good, but it's not impressive by any means. And obviously, it's still a fucking drop-off. What was it? 12k a peak during August. What was it in 21? Barely breaking 12k. In 21, well, it was breaking 13k, sometimes 14k. It's still an obvious, like, drop. Still an obvious drop. And of course, if you can't play overnight, well, people who can only play during those times, they're gonna fall off. It's... The only server that seems to have any stable numbers is CIS Server, and when you talk to the people who play on CIS Server, everyone says that the server is full of bots. I can't verify that because I don't play there myself, but that is just the feedback I've gotten from my viewers, from people on Discord. Generally, when talking about the server, people in YouTube comments tend to go, yeah, basically botters, the server is filled with botters these days. So, if the only server that's healthy is being held up by that, then obviously the drop-off is brutal. The drop-off is brutal. And that's why it's extra baffling when the trend looks like this, and the opinion of submarines is obviously hilariously negative. Like, hilariously negative. Like, I don't know if you guys have... I have the thing installed where you can see what people actually vote. Well, people can see upvotes and what is it, likes and dislikes on YouTube. It's called like show thumbs down, and you can just look at any submarine related video from World of Warships. Like, let's see, what was the latest one? Oh, the update that added submarines. Well, any update really involving submarines. Let's see, the update that added submarines. This is their YouTube vid where they add submarines to the game. Look at this. This is normally hidden by YouTube, but you can install a mod that I use that shows you what people really think. And, like, where's this hidden silent majority that really loves and looks forward to submarine? Where is this silent majority? And it's not just like this. Like, anytime they even talk about subs, like, we have this one. Submarines Underwater World gameplay trailer. Like, look at these numbers. This is just a short trailer. It never used to look like this. People used to be really positive about new things in the game, but submarines are just fundamentally fucking hated. Yeah, that expansion only counts the downvotes of other users with that expansion. Yeah, I mean, the true downvote ratio is probably much worse than this. But considering I can't verify how much worse it is, I can only claim this number. But you're right, it's probably much worse because this extension only checks how many other people with the extension have downvoted. But the actual numbers are probably much worse. Like this bar is probably even further skewed. But even with just counting people who have this extension installed, it's still vast majority. Like, it's way over 50% that are extremely negative about it. It's... You see the way the player numbers are going, and you see the public opinion on submarines, and you're like, who over there in charge at Wargaming is so has like, someone has their ass on the line for subs. Someone pitched the idea of submarines, and someone convinced a bunch of high-ups that submarines are going to be a great addition and the players are going to fucking love it, and now they're completely incapable of admitting fault or backing down because their ass is on the line. They vouched for this submarine thing. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, because if we have to put it in World of Warship terms, they're fucking torpedoing their own ship. They're torpedoing their own ship right now, and I don't understand why the fuck they're doing it.